horrific images of the bombed bodies of children who were collecting water at Nuseirat, a designated refugee shelter. These are the latest to come out of Gaza as Israel continues its attack. The world is watching as the Israeli attack continues on Palestine. Voices from across the globe now calling for an end to what they see as a genocide. The UN Human Rights Council, the UN designated special rapporteurs all have labelled what is happening in Gaza as genocide. UN Special Committee to investigate Israeli practices in a report released in November 2024 had said clearly, Israel's warfare in Gaza is consistent with the characteristics of genocide, with mass civilian casualties and life-threatening conditions intentionally imposed. The International Court of Justice and the International Criminal Court have issued orders. In the case filed by South Africa against Israel for genocide, the ICJ had observed in two separate orders that prima facie, the situation in Palestine showed that irreparable prejudice was being caused to the rights of the people of Palestine. The International Court directed Israeli authorities to take action to prevent genocide. In November 2024, the ICC pre-trial chamber went as far as to issue arrest warrants against Israeli PM Netanyahu and former Defence Minister Yoav Gallant in its case on the situation in the state of Palestine, with the appellate chamber of the ICC in April 2025 dismissing the request of the State of Israel for suspending these arrest warrants for crime against humanity. So why is it that the world is so reluctant to officially label the actions by Israel as genocide? Let's look at what the UN Convention says. UN Convention on the Prevention and Punishment of the Crime of Genocide of 1948 says, genocide means any of the following 5 acts committed with the intent to destroy, whether in whole or in part, a national, ethical, racial or religious group. These actions are killing members of the group, causing serious bodily or mental harm to the members of the group, deliberately inflicting on the group conditions of life calculated to bring about physical destruction in whole or in part, imposing measures intended to prevent births within the group, or forcibly transferring children of the group to another group. The Genocide Convention also bars and punishes not just actual commission of genocide, but also conspiracy, abetment, incitement, and even complicity in these actions. Remember, ironically, the complicity offense came out of the experience from the Nuremberg trials, where Nazi officials and guards of the concentration camps were found guilty of genocide of Jews, with the tribunals making it clear that simply following orders could not be a defense. But how does intent get tested? By the statements and declarations made by the leadership, whether political, military, cultural or religious, and the pattern of conduct on the ground and the actions undertaken. For example, apart from the long-term bombing that we are seeing on civilian areas, the cases of open firing on people queuing up for food, medical aid, and attacks on the refugee centers, these can well be considered evidence of the intent of genocide. Experts across the world have now called out these actions. India Today Global spoke to Dr. Melanie O'Brien, President of the International Association of Genocide Scholars. Here's what she had to say.
So the discussion has also been through this period about whether or not genocide is taking place. And at this point, it really has become irrefutable, because we look at a number of things when we're talking about, is a situation genocide? So the first one is the intent there? So part of the definition is the intent to destroy a particular group. And this is what makes genocide different and also quite difficult to prove in a court of law, because you have to be able to prove that the perpetrators intended to destroy that people. And so the question is, how do we prove that? There are a couple of main ways, and the first way that we prove that is to look at statements that are made by prominent figures. So particularly, for example, political leaders and military leaders or other prominent people in a particular society. So people who have a media presence, strong cultural leaders. So in this case, in particular, we'd be talking about political and military leaders in Israel who have, from October 2023 been making very overt statements about the starvation of the Palestinian people, the destruction of Palestine, and of course, blocking aid, blocking the provision of supplies to the Palestinian people in Gaza. So those statements of intent have been there since the beginning and continue to be made by the political and military leadership in Israel. The second way that we can prove that intent is by looking at the actions of the alleged perpetrators. So looking at a pattern of conduct. And that's what we would see here, which would really say that there is an intent to destroy these people, because we are seeing indiscriminate bombing, long-term indiscriminate bombing that is killing people, that is destroying livelihoods, that is destroying infrastructure, that is destroying healthcare facilities and healthcare workers. Now we have also for some time been seeing the denial of humanitarian aid, within which we mean the denial of food, the denial of healthcare, the denial of medicines in particular. So we're putting a lot of people into a small place, which means that communicable diseases increase and access to food decreases. And so obviously what is needed for those is food and medicine, both of which are being denied to the people. So obviously if you are denying food and medicine to people who are starving and who are ill, that an obvious outcome of that is going to be death. That's a high likelihood. And so therefore you have to say, well, obviously their intent must be to kill, to destroy, at least in part, the Palestinian people of Gaza. And I think in particular, we've seen also recently, in the past months, even in the past weeks, Israeli military open firing on people who are queuing up, who are trying to get food, and they are being open fired on, which has resulted in the deaths of hundreds of people. So obviously the idea is to create fear in people so that they don't even want to try and get food, because that is just another situation in which they will risk death.
Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu and his ministers have made multiple statements in the media about cleaning out Gaza. As recently as last week, Netanyahu, during his US visit, spoke of forced removal of Palestinians from Gaza. Let's listen into some of the recent statements that have been made by Israeli authorities.
I think President Trump had a brilliant vision. It's called free choice. If people want to stay, they can stay. But if they want to leave, they should be able to leave. It shouldn't be a prison. It should be an open place and give people a free choice. We're working with the United States very closely about finding countries that will seek to realize what they always say, that they want to give the Palestinians a better future. And those who, and I think we're getting close to finding several countries, and I think this will give, again, the freedom to choose. Palestinians should have it, and I hope that we can secure it close by.
And even pro-Israel scholars are now calling for action. India Today Global spoke to Israeli scholar and genocide expert Dr. Shmuel Lederman, an Israeli Jew who is speaking from Tel Aviv. He has called out his own government now for the genocide. Let's listen in.
There is quite a consensus among genocide scholars about this question. Now, it's very hard to assess that, in any kind of certainty, because after all, there are many different genocide scholars, and some are more involved in the situation and speak about it and write about it, and some are less. But to the extent that one can assess that, that's my sense as well, that, basically almost any genocide scholar that I saw or I heard said, well, at that point, I think it's genocide. And that has been roughly the case, I would say, since the second half of 2024. Now, I do need to clarify that there are actually two different discourses going on here, because when genocide scholars speak, usually and naturally, when people speak about genocide, they think in the legal terms, right? There is a Genocide Convention, a UN Genocide Convention that defines the term genocide, and it's a specific legal definition. And that's one discourse that many are engaged in, whether it rises to the very high bar, it should be said, of the legal definition of genocide. But genocide scholars, for a long time, for decades, have been engaged in a discourse that is critical of the legal definition because it's a very narrow definition, and because it's originated partly in the political interest of the states that formulated it. So we've been critical of this definition. So I would say, I think at this point, probably for the majority of genocide scholars, when they say this is genocide, they also think in terms of the legal definition, but
Right.
also more broadly. For others, I would say, and in certain senses, including myself, we feel less committed to the legal definition and more to broader definitions that we have in mind. And first and foremost, to the reality we're seeing in front of our eyes, which is basically in Gaza, the Gaza society is being destroyed by Israel. I mean, there is no way around it. I think that's clear to anyone who has conscience and clear eyes to see what is going on.
The onus under the Geneva Conventions and the Genocide Convention is on the collective world to prevent and punish the crime of genocide. The ICJ, ICC and various UN bodies are talking about the problem, but little is being done to actually stop the violence. We also spoke to noted lawyer and UN Special Rapporteur on Health, Anand Grover, who called out the total breakdown of international law-based order and the role being played by the US in particular for the inaction by the UN. Let's listen in.
If it is provable that the leaders of the Israeli government have spoken about annihilation of Palestinians, the acts which are going on now, coupled with the so-called intention that can be proved, it would constitute genocide. But that is a matter of proof. And the South African government has actually put forward a huge amount of proof for that purpose. But that could be, and even if it is shown that Hamas's intention, because Hamas's intention keeps changing, it's a motley group of militants or whatever, and their intentions, coupled with the act of 7th October 2023, it could be argued that it's an act of genocide. It could be argued. But that's on a very weak footing compared to the Israeli complicity in the cases.
The images and reports coming from Gaza show terrifying images of the humanitarian crisis that is unfolding in Gaza, particularly as children, civilians, injured and sick are facing bullets and being denied food and health care. It is for the world as a whole to step up and take action. Thank you for watching India Today Global.